Welcome back to another episode of the Executive Code podcast. I'm joined here with Nicole, and Nicole has another question that she wants answered in relation to personal mastery. So, Nicole, what have you got for us this week?
Hi, Paul. So in the book Deep Work, Cal Newport, the author, says deep work is the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task. And in our modern world, that's like a superpower. So what do you think about the concept of deep work?
Okay, first of all, I haven't read the book, so I can't answer fully, and I can't answer completely in relation to the book, but I can answer in relation to deep work. I have read I've scanned through the book, so I haven't read it in detail. So I'll say that straight up, just in case I miss anything from that was contained within the book itself. But ultimately, let me put it this way: what I understand from the term deep work that's put forward by Cal is that it's the ability to focus without distraction. That's ultimately what it's about. It's about forming a habit whereby we can create a scenario whereby we're going into the office or going into our job or having a space, an environment whereby we can get into doing deep work. And the more deep work that we do, the more uniqueness that we can bring, and therefore the more value that we can either bring to our employer or to clients. So that's kind of, maybe for one better word, a quick synopsis of what I garnered from scanning through the book itself. But let me put it to you this way. Let me ask you, Nicole, were you ever doing a task where you were just totally and utterly consumed in what it is that you were doing, and you lost all sense of time and space? And when you finished that task, you felt completely fulfilled?
Yeah, a few times, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's deep work. That would be my interpretation or my definition of deep work. Now, if you were to look at it, so let me break it down for you, because we've done your pilot's manual. So let me just explain how it's actually working together. When you are flying, when you're doing precision flying, when you're reaching new levels, and you're doing things that are different to other people and doing things different to what you've done before, when you're reaching new levels of standards, that's when you are absolutely, totally and utterly in flow. And that's when you're totally and utterly doing deep work, because you're completely focused on what it is that you're doing. And that's when you're going to lose all relevant to space and time. And you're going to feel fulfilled. Wouldn't be right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So can we create a scenario whereby we can do deep work? We can absolutely do it. Now, there may be techniques that Cal put forward in the book. I didn't go through those, but so there may be techniques from that perspective. But what I would absolutely encourage people to do is that the more you're working in line with the elements of what we discussed on previous episodes, whereby it's your genius drivers, it's your purpose, you will literally get into that zone of doing the work that you're doing naturally, because you're innately driven to do it. So let me explain that. Hence the reason why I used yourself as an example, to show you when you're doing particular work, you will absolutely be in the flow and you'll be absolutely focused and lose all concept of time and space. When I'm working with somebody and I'm absolutely doing the work that I'm meant to be doing, hence the reason why I've structured the vast majority of my business so far just to be doing the work that I'm doing. When I'm in that zone, it's just the client and me. That's all there is. There's nobody else. There's nothing else. It's just me and the client. And I lose. In some ways, I've had situations whereby the time has gone, because we were literally just, for one better word, in that zone. That's deep focused work. You don't have to create it when you're doing it naturally with what it is that you're meant to be doing. Unfortunately, for the vast majority of people, they're not doing work of what they're supposed to be doing. They're not doing work in line with what their purpose is, and therefore they're not activating the genius that's within them. When you're activating the genius that's within them, and how you do that is using your genius drivers. That's how you activate it, because your genius drivers are activating the executive center part of your brain, which is in your prefrontal cortex. It's that executive center part of the brain which is it's activating your genius within yourself. When you're activating your genius, now you're in that flow. So can it be done? Absolutely, of course it can. Without a shadow of a doubt, can it be done? What I've interpreted from again, just scanning through the book, is that it's kind of forcing a mechanism in order to get into the space and creating the environment and the habit of doing deep work. Can you get massive benefits from that? Absolutely, because ultimately what you're doing is you're activating your genius. But there's an awful lot easier way that you can actually do it throughout your whole day if you structure your life and your business in line with your genius drivers. Because as I said, it's your genius drivers that are activating the genius within yourself and activating the executive center, and therefore putting you more in line with your unconscious and also then within your flow. That's what I suppose that's what I would put forward in relation to getting into having a mechanism of doing deep work, and the most easiest way of doing it, because now you're working with your innate genius and you're working with your innate abilities in order to actually get into that zone. And when you're doing that, now that's when you're going to feel fulfillment from what it is that you're doing.
So flow produces a sense of true fulfillment that comes from craftsmanship. I also read that, it'll make you better at what you do, and it allows you to quickly master complicated information like hard concepts, and also produce better results in less time because you're completely focused on, that task you're working on. And every time you're distracted, it actually takes you, I think, 20 minutes or 30 minutes to get back into the flow. So, whether it's a email notification, a message on your phone, every time you break that flow, it takes you that long to get back into it. And so if you're distracted, 3 times in an hour, then, that's pretty much your whole hour gone.
It is. I think the science has proven 25 minutes. Yeah. You lose 25 minutes. From the moment you get the interruption, it takes 25 minutes for you to get back into that focused zone of actually doing the work. Yeah.
And a lot of people actually don't realize that they have lost the ability to do deep work because they're so distracted by email and social media, and they don't even realize that there's a better way of working.
Yeah. And that's where time zoning will come into play. So time zoning works on the basis that you're zoning an area in your diary, and that's the work that you want to focus on for that particular section or that zone in the diary. What part of that is eliminating all the distractions. So some of the work that I do with clients is make sure that they turn off all notifications, make sure that they turn off their mobile phone. If somebody needs to get into contact with you, they'll find a way of getting in contact with you. So it's removing all of those kind of distractions, even down to, the notification that you get on an app or the notification that you get on an email system. So it's removing all of those. So therefore now, the more distractions that you can eliminate, or even somebody coming into your office, the more interruptions that you can eliminate, well, then now the more you're allowing yourself to get into that focused zone in order to actually do the work. But going back to what you actually just said earlier on in relation to being a craftsman or craftsperson, for want of a better word, when you're doing work that you absolutely love doing, and the only work that I have found, because this is where I make the distinction between something that you like doing, as in your passion, versus something that is absolutely in line with your purpose, and you see it as a vocation, and you see it as being, this is what I'm absolutely meant to be doing, you become that master craftsperson in what it is that you're doing, because you're innately driven to fulfill that mission. You're innately driven to be more a master what it is that you're doing. I'll never, ever, ever stop perfecting what it is that I do. Never. Until the day I die, I'll never stop perfecting the methodology and what it is that I do. That's becoming the master craftsman or master craftsperson in what it is that you're doing. When you're not doing something and it's something that you either like doing or what people will refer to as passion, I dismiss that term. But when you're doing something that you enjoy doing, it's transient. So therefore, you don't have that same level of motivation. You don't have that same level of innate drive in order to achieve what it is that you want to do. And therefore, that's where some people give up on it. So just when you mention that word craftsman, I just wanted to touch on that piece.
Yeah, I think most people don't see themselves as sort of a artist or a craftsman, right? But we all are, because we're, working to better our lives and personal mastery.
Yeah.
So we previously talked about time blocking in one of the earliest episodes we did together. What is the difference between that time blocking and time boxing?
None. That's a simple answer. So you'll have time zoning is the term I typically use. You have time zoning, you have time blocking, you have time boxing, and they're all pretty much the same things. The only difference that you'll find is that one system will be more regimental than the others. So what do I mean by that? So what I'd say is it depends on how regimental you want to be. So some people, when they talk about time boxing or time blocking, what they will say is, set an alarm clock at the very moment that you're going into that particular time block, and that the alarm clock is set for whether it be 30 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever the time block is that you're allocating. So the alarm goes off, and then you finish that task, and now you're on to something. You take a break, and then you're on to something else. That's quite regimental, and therefore you have to be. It's quite. It's high intensity, so it depends on what's the high intensity that you want to go to. Time zoning is exactly the same thing, but it just depends on how much regiment you want to have in relation to applying the time zone that you have. So for me, I'm a little bit more flexible when I'm talking about time zoning. There's 4 areas that I ask clients or encourage clients to bring into the diary. So therefore, they're touching each of the areas that they absolutely need to touch, so as to avoid burnout and so as to avoid a feast and famine cycle within their business. So those 4 areas, administration, business development, client delivery, and me time. They're the 4 areas. When you got that structured within your week, within the work that you're doing, well, then now you'll remove the burnout, you remove the overwhelm, and you remove the feast and famine cycle. So, but each zone can have different lengths. Now, I normally recommend 90-minute chunks as a time zone, and then a break in between each one. So it's the same, for one better word, it's the same thing as time blocking or time boxing. It's just the same thing. It just depends on how much of a regiment you want to run your life to. Meaning, do you want your alarm clock going off at the end of each zone? Do you want to be really, really focused and so on? It just depends on how you want to run your life and run your business.
Time boxing, I read can be helpful if you need to complete a particular task within a preset time constraint. So because you're limiting yourself to, say, completing a task in, say, 30 minutes, whereas a normal time block or time zone would be, 90 minutes, right, as you recommended. Yeah. So, it's great because it helps you if you struggle with perfectionism and, yep, giving yourself 30 minutes instead of, the whole day or the whole time block to finish that task that can be done in 30 minutes. But you have to know that it can be completed in 30 minutes. So, because I think sometimes it's hard to know exactly how long a task will take you. And so that's where a time block may be more useful versus a time box.
Yeah. And look at it this way. Two things I'm going to say on that one. One is, so if you can imagine a racetrack, you can do speed walking on the same racetrack for the same level, for the same distance. You can do jogging, you can do running, or you can do sprinting. So you can still cover the same distance. It just depends on the speed that you want to operate at. So time boxing will pretty much work along those lines, meaning you've got a certain time in order to actually finish a task to do what it is that you're doing. So therefore now you're having a sprint as opposed to doing a leisurely walk or a jog. What you also want to be conscious of is Parkinson's law, which I think we mentioned on one of the episodes before. Parkinson's law is where the task will fill the time. So if you allocate an hour to do the task, you'll fill that time just on that task. If you allocate a half an hour, now you're going to be working a little bit more effectively in order to actually finish that task. So are you playing with how the mind works? You absolutely are. It just depends on how you want to work. So rightly, as you say, Nicole, when you got a deadline that you've got to meet and you got to break that task down into the particular time slots and so on, time boxing can be really helpful from that perspective. In order to, you've got a timer, you're kicking off, you're doing it, you're focused, and you've got the task finished. Is there a way of doing that from a long-term basis? My argument will be no, because that's like going through your life, sprinting the whole time. After every single sprint, you've got to have a break, and you can't be sprinting the whole time. Otherwise, you will go to burnout. Not from maybe perhaps mental, maybe you will, but physically you will as well. So time boxing has its case, but not all the time.
Yeah, and sometimes we underestimate how much time a task will take. And so if we're limiting ourselves to only that amount of time in a time box, then we may skip over something important, or we may miss out something. And so that's why I prefer the time blocking way, where it's 90 minutes, and that can be one or more tasks, right? It doesn't have to be just one task. You can just finish one, and then the rest of the time block can be on another task. And so there is much more flexibility with that, although it is much longer usually than a time box.
Yeah. It gets back to the same thing in terms of, our eyes are typically always bigger than our stomachs. So when I go to a restaurant, I'll order more food than my stomach will allow. When it comes to trying to gauge how much time it's going to take a task, sometimes we think we can actually get the task done quicker, which is exactly what you're saying, Nicole. We think we can get the task done quicker, but actually it does take a little bit longer. So when we know ourselves a little bit more, we can start to bring in a few adaptations of allowing ourselves a little bit more time, or allowing ourselves a little bit more flexibility, or breaking the task down even more into much, much smaller chunks, and knowing for certain, we can get that task done.
And then within a time box, the deadlines are usually external deadlines, which can produce a lot of stress as well.
Yeah.
When you're sprinting from deadline to deadline, as you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there's a few things that you might want to think about in relation to do more focus work, do more deep work, looking at whether you want to implement time zoning or time blocking or time boxing into your life, and see what works for you. Bottom line is, it's what's going to work for you. It's not just a one size fits all. It's what's actually going to suit you best. So if you want to find out more on how we discuss and the different conversations that we have within the community, by all means, come over to paulwilliamdavis.com, where there's more resources and more ways of how you can get in contact with us. So until next time, I wish you every success.